Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support inspires us. Thank you for being with us, and we hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe and stay tuned. Arthur Bennett pulled himself out of his chair with difficulty, looking up from insurance and endless reports. It was a difficult day at the office, and he was relieved to go home. As always, he was looking forward to a quiet evening, a delicious dinner, conversations with his wife, perhaps a game with his grandson the next day. Life flowed smoothly and reliably, exactly the way he always liked it. But already on the threshold, Arthur felt something unusual. The dimmed light in the hall, the light scent of Marian's perfume, her new hairstyle and a dress that he had not seen before. "I made us a reservation at Jardines for 7, Marian said with a mysterious smile that made Arthur feel a little uneasy. Jardines was an expensive restaurant in the city center, and Marian had never started such dinners for nothing. Having automatically run through all the dates in his head, Arthur calmed down. Neither the anniversary nor the birthday. He did not forget anything like that. He let her lead him into the bedroom, where he changed into a suit, feeling like a stranger in this sudden splendor. Marian looked amazing, bright eyes, a smile slightly touched with lipstick. But despite her beauty, Arthur caught something restless in her eyes. Her mood seemed upbeat, but tense, as if she was preparing to say something important, and Arthur did not know what to prepare for. In the restaurant, they were shown to a table by the window, and as soon as they were settled, Marian froze, as if gathering her thoughts. Arthur watched her shift the cutlery on the table one by one, and, feeling the tension growing, decided to break the silence first. "Well, dear," he said, trying to make his voice light, "I think now is the moment when you have to show your cards." Marian seemed relieved, but hesitated for a few more seconds before speaking. "Arthur, I want you to know, Bruce Morrison is back." These words felt strangely heavy in Arthur's chest. The name sounded like it came from a past he had not remembered in a long time. Bruce, Marian's first love, whom she once dated when she was still a girl. That was probably the beginning of their relationship with Marian. He became for her the one who helped her forget the past and start a new life. "Back. What is it?" he asked, choosing his words carefully. "You mean you came to visit?" She shook her head without looking away, and he saw the worry in her eyes. "No, he is going to live here. I bought a house 2 streets away from us," she replied almost in a whisper, as if she was afraid that her words might disturb their stable family happiness. Arthur felt his insides tighten. He stared at his wife in silence, not knowing what to say. In all their long life together, he had never seen her so worried. And, worst of all, he felt that this anxiety was not related to his, Arthur's, feelings, but to something completely different. "We've seen each other," Marian began, and this time her voice trembled slightly. "He came last week to say that we are now neighbors. We talked about school, and, Arthur, I realized that I had to decide something." A waitress appeared on the table to offer drinks, and Arthur, with all his efforts, nodded his thanks, trying to delay the moment of truth. When the waitress left, Marian, as if relieved of tension, got to the point. "I need a year, Arthur," she said, looking into his eyes. "A year to sort myself out, to understand what is really important to me. I love you, but I realize that I still feel something for Bruce. Maybe I need to relive it all over again." Arthur felt an icy sensation rush through his veins, leaving him both numb and terrified. Their 30-year marriage, his comfort at home, his family, it all seemed destroyed in an instant. He was silent for a long time, unable to find words. He just nodded, trying to suppress the jealousy and anger that flared up inside until he could say something. "Do you really think this is a good idea?" "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep a calmness in his voice that he did not really feel. "Are you willing to risk everything for this meeting?" Marian put her hand on his, and from that touch he felt a pang of pain, because this hand, like all her touches, belonged to him, his home, their past. "I think it is better this way," she whispered, squeezing his hand a little harder. "Please understand, Arthur, it is not because I've stopped loving you. I just need time to understand myself. It will only be a year." He nodded slowly, even though he knew that this year could destroy everything they had built. "Okay," he said finally, forcing himself to look her straight in the eye. "Only with one condition. I do not want to see or hear from you this year. No calls, no meetings. If you decide to do this, then everything else should be left." Marion froze, but, gathering herself, nodded in response. "Thank you, Arthur. You'll understand everything, I promise. We'll be together again. You'll just see." Those words sounded almost like a sentence, and there was a void in the silence between them that he had never felt before. Marion drained her glass of wine and moved closer in gratitude for his agreement. But he pulled away, realizing that touching could no longer erase what had just been said. When Arthur returned home, he did not go to their shared bedroom. He took the pillow and silently went into the guest room, where he stayed until the morning, looking at the ceiling and trying to realize that this was not just a bad dream. Morning came, and Arthur, as always, went down to the kitchen, but he was met by the wrong house. Marion dressed, packing her suitcases and marking out a calendar, a round date circled with a bold line as a reminder of her temporary freedom. Arthur watched this with silent despair while she tried to cheer him up, assuring him that a year was only a moment. But at that moment, Arthur felt like he was losing her forever. Marion made breakfast, and then, hiding her joy behind a formal smile, whispered, "See you in a year, Arthur. Trust me, everything will be fine." Instead of answering, Arthur nodded softly, and his face froze in a stern expression when he heard a car pull up to the house. Bruce appeared on the doorstep, full of enthusiasm, ready to take Marion into a new life. Unable to remain a spectator any longer, Arthur went into the office, and when everything was quiet, he went upstairs, made a firm decision to change the locks on all the doors and start a new life. Arthur woke up to the faint morning light filtering through the blinds in the guest room, feeling tired like he had not felt in a long time. In those few weeks, his life had turned into an empty ritual: work, home, silence, and work again. Without Marion, everything seemed meaningless. She was not at breakfast. There was no question on duty about how the day had gone. It took Arthur a moment to realize how strong this emptiness was. He did not tell anyone about what happened. Not to his friends, not to his daughter Hannah, who continued to call and occasionally drop by with her grandson. Hannah felt that something was wrong, but her mother managed to convince her that it was just a temporary separation. A month passed, and Arthur was beginning to get used to his new life. One evening Hannah called, "Hi, Dad. How are you? Frank, the kid, and I would like to come visit tomorrow if you do not mind." Arthur felt his heart tighten. He knew he would have to say something. Taking a deep breath, he replied, "Of course, come. I was just thinking it would be nice to see you." The next morning, Arthur got up early, made coffee, and began to prepare the house for the visit. He wanted everything to look normal so that Hannah would not suspect anything. When the daughter, her husband, and child arrived, Arthur met them on the doorstep, hugged her tightly, and even tried to smile. Hannah immediately noticed his change. "Dad, you look tired. Everything is fine?" He waved his hand, hiding his worry behind a tired smile. "Just a job, honey. Everything is fine. Where's Mom?" Hannah looked around, expecting to see her mother in her familiar surroundings. Arthur knew that this moment would come, and tried to speak calmly. "Hannah, let us sit down. We need to talk." They sat down on the sofa, and Arthur, looking down, began to explain. "Your mom, she has gone," he said, feeling his throat go dry. Hannah looked at him in disbelief. "But where to?" "Why, you see, Hannah." Arthur chose his words so as not to offend his daughter, but also not to hide the truth. "She decided to take a break in our relationship. Renew an old friendship with a man from her past." Hannah frowned, and concern appeared in her eyes. "You mean Bruce Morrison?" Arthur nodded, feeling his fingers clench into a fist. "Yes, Bruce, her high school sweetheart, who seems to have decided not to let her go until now." Hannah squeezed his hand. "Dad, I'm so sorry. It is horrible. How did you even agree to this?" Arthur sighed heavily, staring into the void. "I do not know, Hannah. It just seemed to me that it was better than losing her forever. She said it was only a year, and then everything would be back to normal. Hannah shook her head, and determination appeared on her face. Dad, you do not have to put up with this. This is wrong. You deserve more than just to be the one who sits and waits. Arthur grinned, but there was so much bitterness in his smile. I know, Hannah, but 30 years of marriage is not so easy to forget. I still love her despite everything. Every day when she is not around, it gets harder for me. She put her hand on his shoulder and said softly, "We all with you, Dad. You're not alone." The rest of the day was spent in a warm atmosphere. They talked, laughed, but something inexorably hung in the air. When Hannah left, Arthur returned to his lonely silence. Another week passed, and one day Arthur, sitting in a local cafe, saw familiar faces on the street. Marion and Bruce were walking along the road. They looked happy holding hands. Arthur's heart sank with pain. He felt like a stranger in his own city. He could not turn away. So much was he pierced by jealousy and anger. How can a man to whom he has given his whole life start anew once so easily? They walked off into the distance, and Arthur remained staring into his cup, not noticing how his coffee had cooled. When he returned home, he felt a growing anxiety that was impossible to get rid of. He called a friend and colleague, Jerry, a man he trusted as much as himself. "Hi, Jerry, can you meet me? There is something we need to discuss." "Of course, Arthur," Jerry replied, his voice full of sympathy. "What happened? You are not usually the type to complain." "It is a long time to explain," said Arthur. "Can we meet at Flynn's by 7? "Agreed." In the evening, they sat at the bar in the pub, and Arthur told Jerry about his situation, trying to avoid details, but expressing all the pain that he kept to himself. "Do you really think this will only last a year?" Jerry asked, listening intently. "She said she would come back, but every day I realize more and more that it may not happen." "Bruce." Arthur sighed heavily. He returned to her life, and it seems that they found a common language as if they had never parted. Jerry shook his head thoughtfully. "Arthur, you see, not just sit back and wait. Do not you deserve better?" "I deserve it," said Arthur slowly. "But, Jerry, I've given Marion my whole life. And, to be honest, I see a not just cross it out. She was everything to me." Jerry put a hand on his shoulder. "Arthur, you do not have to suffer. You are a man who has always been faithful, always been there for me. And if she does not appreciate it, maybe it is time to think about yourself?" Arthur did not answer, feeling the weight of these words fall on his heart. He shook his head, thinking about what he had heard, and, getting up, thanked his friend. Silence greeted him home. My gaze fell on the calendar, where the beginning of the 1-year break was marked. He had seen her once, marked with a bold line like a promise, but now every day was getting more painful, longer. Several more weeks passed in the same rhythm. One day he came across an open photo of him and Marion and Hannah on the beach, smiling, young and happy. This moment was real, and it seemed to him that nothing could be returned. Arthur went to the phone and dialed Hannah. "Dad," she responded joyfully. "Anna, I just wanted to hear your voice." She smiled through the phone. "I'm so glad you called. Frank and I were just planning to come by your place. We'll bring your grandson. You need a little distraction, Dad." Arthur paused, feeling something thaw in his chest from the warmth of her words. "Thank you, Hannah," he said gratefully. "I think this is exactly what I need right now." The conversation ended, and Arthur felt light. There were so many unpredictable things ahead, but he knew that his family, though incomplete, would always be there. Another month has passed. Arthur's life slowly began to level out. He changed his routine, started working more to distract himself. But the thought that Marion and Bruce could be together still weighed heavily on him. Trying to stay strong, Arthur decides to go on a business trip that has been brewing for a long time, an excuse to change the situation and perhaps get a fresh look at his life. His boss, Mr. Barkley, offered to send Arthur to a conference in Chicago, and he agreed, thinking that a change of scenery would be beneficial. On the train on the way to Chicago, Arthur reflected on his situation, feeling heavy at heart, but at the same time realizing that he needed to find a way to move on. In the hotel where Arthur checked in, there was a buffet for conference participants in the evening, and he decided to stop by. Keeping to the side, he stood with a glass of wine, watching the strangers. He was comfortable alone until a woman approached him with a warm smile and sincere interest. "Are you also in the insurance business?" "What is it?" she asked, noticing his badge. Arthur turned and saw a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed, with soft features and friendly eyes. She was warm at home and not at all like the business sharks he was used to talking to at such events. "Yes, I'm in insurance," Arthur replied, smiling, slightly confused by her unexpected approach. "Arthur Bennett. Nice to meet you, Arthur. My name is Julia Fields. I also work in this field, but more in real estate valuation." Arthur felt his painful state recede for the first time in a long time. He felt relieved talking to Julia. She told him about her work, and the conversation gradually turned to more personal topics. "I'm sorry if I seem curious," she asked cautiously, "but you look a little, how should I put it, worried." A difficult period? Arthur thought about it, but then, feeling Julia's sincerity, decided to answer honestly. "You rewrite. My wife and I, we on a kind of break right now, if I may say so." He chuckled faintly, saying it out loud, as if he were admitting something incredible. She met an old acquaintance, and this opened up new perspectives for her, which she believes she needs to explore. Julia nodded, looking at him with understanding. "You know, sometimes breaks can show what we really lack," she replied softly, "but they can also help us understand who we really are." His gaze lingered on her face, and he sensed that perhaps her words were what he needed to hear right now. "Maybe you rewrite," he nodded, thinking for a moment. "I spent so many years building our relationship, our home, that I lost myself in it. Believe me, I understand. Sometimes, in order to sort yourself out, you need to move away from the usual," she replied with a smile. This evening ended with a warm farewell and an exchange of numbers. Julia may not have realized, but she left Arthur with the feeling that he could still change his life, that he could still be someone for himself. For the rest of the evening, Arthur wandered around the city, looking at the lights and listening to the noise of cars, feeling that he had returned to himself, to a man who determines his own path. The next day, when Arthur returned to the city, he decided that he could no longer stay in the same place. He turned to a lawyer he had known for a long time, Mr. Goodman, for legal advice. Goodman was older than Arthur and had long earned his trust. "Well, Arthur, tell me," Goodman began, looking over the top of his glasses, "what brought you to me?" Arthur lowered his head, choosing his words. "Marion, she asked me for a year to think about it, but it is too much like preparing for a breakup. I do not think I can forgive her when she comes back. I want to file for divorce." Goodman nodded, understanding the seriousness of the decision. "Are you sure this is what you want? I know that 30 years of marriage is not a small thing." Arthur sighed heavily, as if he was deciding to let go of many years of his life. "Yes, I'm sure. I think she has already made a choice. And if that is the case, I have to make mine." "I understand," the lawyer nodded. "On the legal side, a divorce will be in your favor, especially if you consider her temporary absence as a form of marital rejection. You will be able to keep your assets, but perhaps the division of property will need to be discussed in more detail." Arthur, feeling relieved by what he had said, nodded. "Yes, that is what I need. I want to close this chapter in my life." After talking to the lawyer, Arthur went to the park and sat on a bench, thinking about his decision. Suddenly, he felt a sense of liberation escalate. He was finally in control of his own life, instead of being held hostage by a situation he had not chosen. Several days passed, and Arthur called Julia almost every evening. "It is Frank and I decided. We were going to have a housewarming party at your house. Well, as yours, now will be ours." Arthur did not immediately understand what his daughter was talking about, and then it dawned on him. Hannah and her husband were planning to move into their family home. "Do you want to move into the house where your mom and I lived?" "What is it?" he asked cautiously, a little surprised. "Yes, Dad. This house holds so many memories. In addition, it is more suitable for a family with a small child." His heart squeezed for a moment. They had so many happy moments in this house. But he quickly realized that this place belongs to the past, a past that no longer makes sense to hold. Hannah, I'm happy for you. I think it will be a good home for your family, he replied, feeling sadness give way to warmth. Thanks, Dad. We are happy that you agreed. This conversation gave Arthur a sense of closure. It was as if someone was pushing him to let go of the past and start living for himself. As time passed, the day came when Arthur felt relieved for the first time in a long time. He realized that it was time to take a step forward. Over the past months, he has learned one important truth. You cannot sit and wait for someone else to decide your fate for you. Arthur called Julia again, inviting her to dinner, feeling that he was ready to let something new into his life. His story with Marion had not yet come to an end, but he knew that the past no longer dictated to him how to live. He left the house and, feeling relief pierce him to the very bones, finally realized that life was just beginning. Christmas evening turned out to be especially snowy and frosty. Arthur barely parked at his daughter's house before the snow managed to block the entrance. It was the second time he had been here in a few months, and he was still getting used to his new role as a visitor rather than a host. As he promised Hannah, for the sake of his little grandson, he agreed to spend the holiday with the family, despite the presence of Marion and her companion, Bruce. Arthur sighed heavily, trying to prepare himself for what awaited him. Finally, he knocked on the door, and a few moments later, Hannah opened it. When she saw her father, she beamed and threw her arms around his neck. "Dad, I'm so glad you came," she said, hugging him tightly. "I know it's not that easy for you, but it is so important to me and to the baby." "It is okay, Hannah," Arthur replied, hugging her. "I'm here for you. Nothing else matters." Hannah smiled, realizing that he was doing this for her, and led him into the living room, where everyone else was already gathered. There was a Christmas tree in the room, decorated with many colorful lights and toys, and neatly folded gifts lay under it. Garlands hung on the walls, and the smell of pine needles and freshly made cookies hung in the air. When Arthur entered, his gaze immediately fell on Marion, who was standing by the window, in a dark green dress, and talking to Bruce. They noticed him almost immediately, and Marion smiled, although there was tension in her eyes. "Hello, Arthur," she said softly, coming closer. "I'm glad you could come." "Thank you, Marion," he nodded, trying to keep a low profile. He turned to Bruce, who was standing behind her, with a clear challenge in his eyes. "Bruce," Arthur nodded, trying to stay calm. "Arthur," the man replied with restraint, slightly raising an eyebrow. His expression seemed haughtily confident, as if he was the master of the situation. Arthur realized that Bruce no longer sees him as a rival, but simply as a husband on pause. Hannah broke the silence by clapping her hands and announcing that it was time to open the presents. "Let us all sit down. Let us start with gifts for the baby," she said enthusiastically, picking up the infant in her arms and drawing everyone's attention to the new family member. Arthur sat down on the sofa, watching his family. His heart ached with longing and a sense of loss. What had once been his home now belonged to the past. He pulled himself together, deciding that, as planned, he would end this evening formally, but with dignity. When Hannah presented the first gifts to little Tom, smiles lit up the faces of everyone present. The kid, of course, did not realize what was happening yet, but he was delighted with the bright colors of the packaging and the brilliance of the New Year's garlands. This moment made Arthur forget his worries for a moment. After all the gifts were handed over, it was Arthur's turn. He looked around the room carefully, lingering on Hannah and then, finally, on Marion. "I have gifts too," he began, taking out several neatly packed boxes from his bag. He handed a small gift bag to Hannah and Frank, and they happily opened it, finding there the key to his former house, now handed over to them. "Dad, it means that you—" Hannah could not believe her eyes, and Frank stared at the keys in a daze. "Yes, this is your home now," Arthur nodded, feeling relieved at his decision. "You and the baby will be more comfortable there than in your apartment. It is your property now." Hannah screamed with joy and rushed to hug her father. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Thanks, Dad. You have no idea what this means to us." When the joy had subsided a little, Arthur turned to Marion. He took a small box out of his bag and handed it to her. "This is for you," he said, trying not to look in her eyes. Marion took the box, and her face showed surprise. She carefully opened it and saw a thin gold bracelet with the inscription, "Thank you for 30 wonderful years, Arthur." "Arthur," she whispered, shocked. "It's very beautiful, but—" Arthur nodded before she could finish. "I'd like you to keep this as a reminder of what we shared. It was our marriage, our family. But now I want you to know that I'm letting it go. I'm letting you go." Marion's eyes filled with tears. She tried to say thanks, but her voice faltered treacherously. Bruce, noticing the confusion on her face, came closer and put his hand on her shoulder, as if trying to assert his rights to her. "It's okay, honey," he said, but his voice sounded irritated. "Do not be dramatic." "Dramatize it?" Arthur could barely contain his bitterness. "I guess you just do not understand, Bruce, that this bracelet is all that's left of 30 years. The silence that followed these words hung heavy. Hannah looked from her mother to Bruce, and then to her father, clearly not knowing how to react. Bruce narrowed his eyes and turned to Arthur. "Well, since you won't let go of the past, Arthur, maybe you should stop interfering? Marion deserves some happiness." Arthur grinned, but there was deep pain in his eyes. "Do you think I was bothering her?" "Well, maybe. But you know, Bruce, I do not think you will ever know what it's like to really take care of someone for so many years. It's more than just a fleeting attraction or romantic ideals that you love to tell." Bruce's eyes flashed, and he stepped forward. "You sound like an old man, Arthur. Maybe that's why you lost her." Arthur felt a surge of anger, but remembering the presence of Hannah and his grandson, he pulled himself together and stepped back. Meanwhile, Marion was looking at both men with pain and confusion. "That's enough, Bruce," she finally said, taking his hand and trying to stop him. "Let us not make a scene, please." Arthur gathered all his composure and turned to Hannah. "Hannah," he said softly, "I do not know what will happen next, but I want you to know that I will always be there for you and little Tom, no matter what decisions your mother makes." Hannah clung to him, feeling his strength and care. "Thanks, Dad. I always knew I could count on you." When the festive evening came to an end, Arthur felt that the final clarity had come to his heart. He looked around at everyone for the last time. Hannah was there, happy with her husband and baby, and her eyes shone with gratitude to him. Marion, on the other hand, stood with sadness and alienation. Her thoughts seemed to be far away from him, where she belonged, next to Bruce. Arthur took out his phone and looked at the photos he had taken recently in Chicago. Remembering Julia, her words that change is a way to get to know yourself. He realized that he had a life ahead of him that he had not yet known, and the freedom that he had finally found. "Goodbye," he said softly, although no one in the room heard him. A few days after that ill-fated Christmas, Arthur finally made his decision. He met with his lawyer, Mr. Goodman, to begin the divorce process. 30 years of marriage seemed like a long-forgotten page in his life, and now Arthur wanted to close it once and for all. After the new year, Arthur began to prepare for the move. He arranged a meeting with the management and discussed the possibility of transferring to another office located in another state. Everything was going according to plan. His request was approved, and he had to leave the city in which he had lived all his life. He was finally gaining the freedom he had long dreamed of feeling. The evening before she left, Hannah invited him to dinner. He knew that this meeting was important to her. Hannah realized that her father was not just leaving, but leaving their lives. Time flew by unnoticed, and now Arthur was already standing on the threshold of her new home. Hannah greeted him with joy and a little sadness. "Dad, come in," she said, hugging him. "We're all so glad to see you." He went inside and saw Frank, his son-in-law, waiting for him with his son in his arms. Frank held out his hand to him and then handed the baby over. "Here you go, Arthur. Here it is, your little Tom." Arthur smiled at his grandson. The child smiled back, holding out his little hands to him, and Arthur felt something warm and touching respond to his heart. "Hello, little Tom," Arthur said softly, gently rocking the baby in his arms. "It seems to me that you have already matured in these few weeks." He is really growing fast. Hannah nodded, proudly watching the baby. I'm glad that we will have your house so that it grows in the same place where I grew up. You see, not imagine how important this is to me. Arthur nodded, realizing that this was one of his best decisions. Her house, her family, all this was a symbol of his past, which now lives in her future. They sat down at the table, enjoying dinner and discussing his plans for moving. But soon Hannah touched her father's hand and, looking into his eyes, said, "Dad, are you sure you want to leave?" I just see not imagine that you would not be around. Arthur looked at his daughter, realizing that his departure was really difficult for her. Hannah, I've been thinking about this for a long time, he replied, holding her hand. This does not mean that I'm leaving you forever. I'm just starting a new phase of life that has been waiting for me for a long time. I will always be there for you, even if I'm physically far away. We always have a connection, and you know it. She nodded, trying to hide her tears. Arthur hugged her and said softly, "You be strong, Hannah. You have a wonderful family, and I know you can handle it." They sat together late into the evening, discussing the future, plans, and memories. Finally, it is time to say goodbye. Frank shook Arthur's hand tightly and thanked him for his home and support, and Hannah hugged him once more. "Take care of yourself, Dad," she said, looking into his eyes with a smile and longing. "And do not forget to write to us." "Absolutely," said Arthur, nodding. "You have everything you need to be happy. I am very proud of you." The next morning, Arthur had already packed all his things and was ready to move. He looked around the house one last time, trying to remember it as it had been all these years. It was their nest, the home where he and Marion had spent the best moments of their lives. But now it all seemed far away, like an old movie, and he wanted to leave as soon as possible. He got into his car and headed to the airport to embark on a new life. In his new city, Arthur decided to find a place to live first. A local realtor, with whom he negotiated by phone, met him on the spot and gave him a tour of several apartments. After some thought, Arthur settled on a cozy small apartment with windows overlooking the park and a quiet area around. "An excellent choice, Mr. Bennett," the realtor said, smiling. "It will be very comfortable here. I'm sure you will like it." "Thank you," said Arthur, feeling the warmth spreading through his body from her words. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was in a place where he really felt good. The first weeks passed unnoticed. Arthur gradually set up his new apartment, made acquaintances with colleagues in the new office, and immersed himself in work. He felt like he was at a new stage in his life. Lonely, but free, without the hardships that had accompanied him in recent years. One evening he was sitting in a small cozy coffee shop, not far from home, when he heard a familiar voice. "Arthur?" He turned around and saw Julia, the same woman he had met at a conference in Chicago. She was as elegant and welcoming as she had been the first time. "Julia?" he replied in surprise, smiling. "What a meeting." She walked over to his table and sat down opposite him, looking at him with sincere joy. "I did not think I'd meet you here. You live in another city, do not you?" "Lived," he corrected, a little embarrassed. "Recently moved in. I wanted to start from scratch." Julia nodded understandingly and ordered a coffee. "I understand, Arthur. Change is sometimes so necessary, like the air. How do you like your new life?" Arthur thought for a moment, looking into her warm eyes. "It's not easy, but it's what I had to do," he admitted. "I feel lighter than I have in the last few years. It is probably the first time in a long time that I feel free." Julia smiled. "I'm very happy for you, Arthur. You know, I've always believed that change is an opportunity to discover a new side of yourself." They talked all evening, discussing everything from future plans to their shared memories of the conference. Arthur was surprised at how easy it was for him to be with her, without tension, without unnecessary words. At some point, he caught himself thinking that perhaps their meeting was not just an accident. Before they parted, Julia looked at him with a slight smile. "Arthur, if you do not mind, can we meet again? It would be nice to spend time with you again." Arthur felt his heart stop. He understood that his life had changed and that he was on the verge of something new. "Of course, Julia," he replied, smiling. "I'll be only too glad." They exchanged phones and said goodbye, each going their own way. Arthur returned home feeling that something new was beginning in his life, perhaps better than he could have expected. Sitting in the silence of his apartment, he opened his phone and reread old photos with Marion. He no longer felt the bitterness that he had before. Instead, he felt grateful for the years they had spent together and for the fact that he was now free to start his life anew. This time, Arthur was ready to move forward, knowing that the past would remain in the past, and the future would only be the way he himself would create it. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.